From 2017 through 2023, law enforcement agencies across 3 separate counties prepared to dismantle major criminal enterprises. Operations in Blackpool, Kettering, and Leeds each focused on dismantling networks responsible for moving millions of pounds worth of Class A and Class B narcotics. What detectives discovered challenged common assumptions. The operations weren't staffed solely by male criminals. Women played crucial roles too. A young hairdressing student, a care home worker raising children alone, and several women quietly handling financial transactions. These weren't peripheral players carrying handbags. They were integral to the entire operation. This is an account of how women became central figures in multi-million-pound cocaine and heroin enterprises, and how 3 major criminal networks collapsed when investigators obtained recordings of conversations the criminals believed would remain private forever. You're watching Truth Unraveled. Let's examine these cases. The Gill brothers weren't operating at street level. Between Manchester and Blackpool, Anthony and Bradley Gill constructed a sophisticated enterprise that functioned with business-like efficiency, distributing cocaine, cannabis, and amphetamines through carefully organized layers of transportation and collection operatives. The foundation was a supply pipeline connecting Manchester to Blackpool. Anthony, the older sibling at age 33, controlled the sourcing operation. He maintained relationships with Manchester-based suppliers who could provide kilogram quantities of cocaine that sustained the entire business. Once cocaine reached Blackpool, it never remained stationary for extended periods. His younger brother Bradley, operating from Blackpool, managed the more localized distribution logistics. Transportation operatives were dispatched to deliver packages to residential properties functioning as temporary storage locations. From these addresses, smaller quantities were passed to dealers already established within local communities. Cannabis and amphetamines also moved through the network, but cocaine generated the substantial profits. Currency flowed in reverse. Street-level distributors and dealers accumulated cash, which was then collected by individuals like Scott Rue. We'll examine his role shortly. In essence, dealers received product, currency was collected, and every stage was monitored carefully to ensure money flowed back up the organizational hierarchy. Jessica Lang entered this structure at age 21. A hairdressing student and mother, she appeared completely disconnected from the drug trade on the surface, but she was also their sister, and that family bond made her a trusted component of the network. Police surveillance later positioned her at the operations center. We'll explore this evidence later in this account. Her boyfriend, Scott Rue, became another key operative. He drove throughout Blackpool, conducting meetings with contacts in parking facilities and quiet residential streets. From 2017 forward, he functioned as one of Blackpool's primary cash collectors. He met with lower-tier dealers, gathered their proceeds, and delivered it back to the Gills. Lang frequently accompanied him, providing guidance throughout the process. Around them, the network expanded considerably. Transportation operatives like Joseph Murphy and John Casey moved cocaine between towns. Distribution handlers, including Declan Morgan and Stephen Miller, managed ground-level sales. Bradley McSpirit carried out delivery runs, while Blue Lear and Darryl Wellings participated in collection activities. Even former professional boxer Jack Arnfield became involved, accepting cannabis from the organization in what prosecutors described as debt settlement. Every individual fit into a system engineered to maximize profit while minimizing exposure. At the top, Anthony and Bradley controlled supply channels. Below them, trusted couriers and collectors ensured product movement and currency return. And positioned centrally were Jessica Lang and Scott Rue, the couple whose participation blurred distinctions between family loyalty and organized criminal activity. Encrypted communication devices were fundamental to the system. EncroChat devices and basic pay-as-you-go mobile phones allowed the organization to communicate without using identifiable names. Messages referenced cash or cocaine using coded terminology. One recording captured the use of the word tuna as slang for money. Another showed Anthony Gill discussing quantities without ever uttering the word cocaine. This was designed to confuse outside observers, but within the network, everyone understood precisely what was being communicated. The financial turnover was substantial. In under 2 years, prosecution estimates suggested the Gills moved approximately 28 kilograms of cocaine. Based on street values, the operation was valued at around £3 million, and that figure represented only what investigators could definitively prove. Police later stated the true scale was likely considerably higher. Every role served its purpose. Couriers ensured deliveries never ceased. Collectors kept currency flowing back to the Gills. Stash houses meant drugs were concealed in plain sight across Blackpool. And Anthony and Bradley remained distanced from street-level risk, controlling operations from Manchester and the Fylde coast. The system appeared secure until surveillance technology and hidden microphones began revealing its internal mechanisms. But regardless of how carefully the Gills attempted to hide their activities, every action left evidence. Progressively, Lancashire police observed and constructed a case that would expose the network from within. Lancashire police designated it Operation Jennet, a long-term investigation into what they believed constituted one of the Fylde coast's most significant drug networks. From the beginning, it was built on patient methodology. Detectives didn't rush to action. They constructed their understanding layer by layer until they could visualize the entire structure from top to bottom. One of their most effective tactics was installing listening devices in a Ford vehicle used by Scott LRU, the organization's primary cash collector and Jessica Lang's boyfriend. Inside that vehicle, microphones captured conversations that pulled back the curtain on how the operation actually functioned. In one exchange, Lang could be heard providing LRU with instructions on handling money, even specifying where bundles of currency should be concealed after collections. For investigators, this was proof she wasn't merely a passive passenger. She was actively participating. The surveillance extended beyond vehicles. Officers tracked handovers across Blackpool, sometimes in broad daylight. At a B&Q car park, they observed Lang and LRU during a meeting that involved money transferring between couriers. Lang was heard instructing that the cash be concealed. These moments were routine for the organization, but they became vital building blocks in the prosecution case. Mobile phones also provided a documentary trail. The group relied on inexpensive, disposable handsets, but this didn't prevent police from connecting calls and messages. Operation Jennet didn't just prove the Gills, alongside Jessica Lang, were operating a multi-million-pound enterprise. It also revealed the quiet but central role of Jessica Lang, a young woman caught not on suspicion, but on tape, guiding the trade alongside her brothers and boyfriend. In Northamptonshire, the Vanstone siblings were operating a cocaine enterprise that stood apart from chaotic street-level dealing. It was organized, deliberate, and built around trust. At the center was 27-year-old Dylan Vanstone, described by prosecutors as the individual at the helm. He wasn't supplying grams to end users, he was working wholesale, purchasing cocaine by the kilogram, each worth around £42,000, and feeding it into a network that broke it down and sold it onward. Dylan wasn't a flashy figure. He didn't dominate streets or appear on social media with designer clothing and vehicles. Instead, he operated quietly, structuring his business like a legitimate enterprise. But he didn't work alone. Standing beside him was his sister, 35-year-old Louise Vanstone, a single mother working shifts in a care facility, and someone who might have seemed far removed from organized crime. Yet behind closed doors, her role was critical. Louise managed money. At least £9,000 passed through her personal bank accounts, disguised as ordinary transfers, helping to launder the proceeds of Dylan's trade. She was also the person Dylan relied on for day-to-day operational tasks. When he needed cash moved or drugs delivered, he messaged her directly. One message read, "Sis, will you drop to me please?" Ordinary in tone, but in context, it was a direct instruction demonstrating how naturally she had become part of his business. Police later described her as an administrator within the operation. She wasn't sourcing drugs or negotiating prices, but she was trusted with the everyday details that kept it moving. She booked Dylan's travel, maintained records, and handled transactions that he wanted kept away from his own name. Investigators viewed it as a partnership rooted not in business contracts, but in family loyalty. For Dylan, his sister was someone he didn't have to question. For Louise, whether through pressure, loyalty, or opportunity, she had become part of the trade. The contrast between their roles was sharp. Money moved in the opposite direction. Police searching Dylan's home found cash hidden inside a sofa, along with luxury goods that demonstrated the profits being generated. Watches worth £75,000, high-end clothing, and designer shoes painted the picture of a man enjoying the trappings of success. Yet, despite those outward signs, they continued operating. Her involvement blurred the line between family responsibility and criminal conspiracy. In court, prosecutors were clear. Without her assistance, Dylan's operation would not have functioned as smoothly as it did. The Vanstone siblings weren't the first family in Britain drawn into the drug trade, but their case highlighted a truth investigators had observed before and would observe again. While Dylan and Louise Vanstone formed the family core of the Kettering operation, two other names were critical in making the business function: Sebastian Waller and Gareth Conybeare. Each played a different role, positioned at opposite ends of the supply chain, yet both vital to the flow of cocaine through Northamptonshire. Sebastian Waller, aged 34, was the connection higher up the chain. Based in the East Midlands, but connected to contacts with access to importers, he supplied Dylan with the kilogram amounts of cocaine that formed the foundation of the trade. Waller was described in court as an important bridge, not the ultimate source, but an individual who could secure wholesale quantities and move them into Dylan's hands. Later, investigators traced multiple transactions where Waller provided Vanstone with cocaine that was then broken down for resale. When his residence was raided, evidence connected him to the wider supply chain, confirming that Dylan's access to high-purity products came through him. At the other end of the spectrum sat Gareth Conybeare, aged 36, operating closer to street level. His role was to distribute the cocaine that had already been sourced, cut, and packaged. Conybeare was not a major organizer, but his part was indispensable. When police arrested him, they recovered messages and evidence of smaller-scale dealing, confirming his part in the supply line. Together, the four individuals formed a hierarchy that kept running what was essentially a family-owned drug line. Each link was different, but the chain only functioned because all of them played their part. The Vanstone operation began to unravel in the most ordinary of ways. In March 2020, police in Northamptonshire stopped a vehicle. Behind the wheel was Dylan Vanstone, driving without a valid license. On the surface, it appeared to be routine traffic enforcement. But when officers searched the vehicle, they uncovered far more than a minor motoring offence. Inside the car, they found a baton, a quantity of cannabis, and around £1,000 in cash. The discovery triggered immediate concern. It was the first tangible indication that Dylan was connected to more than just low-level offending. Investigators flagged him as a target, and from there, the scrutiny began to intensify. Surveillance and intelligence led to a series of coordinated raids. When police struck Dylan's address, they uncovered evidence of an individual living off drug proceeds. Almost £10,000 in cash was concealed alongside stashes of cocaine and cannabis. Weapons were also recovered, reinforcing the picture of someone prepared to protect his operation. The money wasn't held in bank accounts or legitimate investments. It was concealed, bundled, and stored in a manner that spoke to the risks inherent in his trade. The investigation then turned toward his sister, Louise Vanstone. When officers raided her residence, the scale of her involvement became clear. In a safe, they found 650 grams of high-purity cocaine, packaged and ready to move. Alongside it sat £4,000 in cash and a supply of grip seal bags, the kind routinely used in drug preparation. Crucially, phone records tied her directly to Dylan's dealings. To investigators, the meaning was unmistakable. She was actively assisting in moving drugs and cash, not simply aware of what her brother was doing. What began with a simple traffic stop had escalated into the dismantling of a network worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Before we examine the raids and arrests of the first organisation, there's one more network to uncover, the final case in this series. By 2022, detectives in West Yorkshire were unpicking another network, one that pushed cocaine and heroin into the streets of Leeds. At the centre was Jordan Walker, aged 31, from Wakefield. Unlike many street-level dealers, Walker operated from a base he attempted to disguise as legitimate. For £78 per month, he rented a small industrial unit in Beeston. On the surface, it appeared to be a storage space. In reality, it was where wholesale cocaine was adulterated, cut down with agents, and prepared for distribution. The unit was central to the trade. The additives maximized profit, stretching each kilogram into far more street deals. Once processed, the drugs were packaged for couriers and moved onto the streets of Leeds, feeding a local market worth millions. Supporting him was Nisha Gohill, aged 32, from Batley. Her role mirrored the pattern observed in Blackpool and Kettering. Trusted because of her closeness to Walker, and valued because she blended into the background. Surveillance showed her delivering bundles of cash to Walker's address several times per week. She wasn't arranging supply lines or directing others, but she was the one who kept money circulating, the part of the business that allowed new shipments to be purchased and processed. The scale was significant. Across the investigation, police seized nearly 100 kilograms of Class A drugs linked to the network, alongside £160,000 in cash and more than 20 kilograms of cutting agents. Evidence also suggested that at least 32 more kilograms of cocaine had already been supplied before the raids. Walker and Gohill weren't operating alone. Robert Hallis, aged 45, from Leeds, and Mark Cross, aged 55, from Stockton-on-Tees, were arrested after a handover involving kilogram amounts of adulterants. Their involvement highlighted how cutting agents, seemingly harmless powders, were as essential to the trade as the cocaine itself. What concerned police even more were the connections to violence. Detectives tied the network to a series of firearms discharges in South Leeds, incidents where drug rivalries spilled into the streets. Behind every consignment was not just profit, but risk and violence that came with protecting territory. And above Walker, there was someone else. An unidentified ringleader, believed to be directing supply lines, had fled abroad during the investigation. Detectives traced his movements to Dubai, where international inquiries are still ongoing. His absence left Walker and Gohill exposed, but also confirmed the scale of what they were part of, a multinational drug pipeline feeding cocaine into Leeds and far beyond. By late 2017, Lancashire police had gathered sufficient evidence under Operation Jennet to act. Surveillance, covert recordings, and intercepted phone calls had revealed the entire operation. With this evidence secure, police launched a series of coordinated raids. When officers entered properties linked to the Gills, they found exactly what they expected. At stash houses, they recovered 6 kilograms of cocaine, along with a quarter kilogram of amphetamines. Large bundles of cash were seized, more than £122,000 in total. The arrests followed quickly. Anthony Gill was taken from Manchester. Bradley Gill was also arrested. Jessica Lang was detained. LRU was picked up as a principal cash collector. Around them, the wider network collapsed. Couriers including Joseph Murphy and John Casey were arrested. Distributors like Declan Morgan and Stephen Miller were also brought in. Even former boxer Jack Arnfield was caught in the operation's fallout. In 2018 at Preston Crown Court, prosecutors laid out the scale of the operation with all the gathered evidence. There was little the defense could put forward beyond stressing that Lang was young, a mother, and not directing the operation. Sentences handed down. Anthony Gill, aged 33, received 14 years imprisonment. Bradley Gill, aged 28, was jailed for 14 years. Jessica Lang, aged 21, was sentenced to 5 years, recognized as a courier and advisor, but not a ringleader. Scott LaRue, aged 30, received 11 years and 4 months for acting as a key cash collector. Other members, including Joseph Murphy, John Casey, Declan Morgan, and Stephen Miller, received terms ranging from 4 to 7 years. Former boxer Jack Arnfield, aged 30, was jailed for 6 years for his part in cannabis supply. Then, on Friday, 10th September 2021, at Leicester Crown Court, prosecutors similarly presented the case. The defense for Louise argued she was a single mother, pressured into helping her younger brother, and not fully aware of the scale. Dylan Vanstone, aged 27, was sentenced to 7.5 years for leading the conspiracy to supply cocaine. Louise Vanstone, aged 35, received 4.5 years for her role as an administrator and facilitator. Sebastian Waller, aged 34, was jailed for 7.5 years as the supplier connected to importers. Gareth Connie Bear, aged 36, was given 3.5 years for street-level distribution. On Friday, December 15, 2023, at Leeds Crown Court, sentencing for this couple was announced in light of the evidence. Jordan Walker, aged 31, was jailed for 11 years as the organizer who controlled the Beeston unit. Nisha Gohill, aged 32, received 5 years and 6 months for her role as a regular cash courier. Robert Hallis, aged 45, was sentenced to 7 years. Mark Cross, aged 55, received 10 years for supplying the adulterants that fed the operation. What do you think about each case and the sentences handed down? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more raw UK crime stories like this, subscribe to Truth Unraveled and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode.